Hello and welcome to episode 97 of the Curling Legends podcast. My guest today is Beau Welling. Reminder, if you're listening to this in your ears or in your car, you can also go to thecurlingnews.com and follow along with some additional graphics and photographs. Beau Welling is the president of World Curling. He's been in that position since the fall of 2022. And what you may not be aware of is that he also is a prominent golf course architect, designer. His company is Beau Welling Design. Notably, he's done work with Tiger Woods, but he certainly has an appreciation of both of these historic Scottish games, both curling and golf. We'll get into his origin in the curling world, but I was fascinated to speak with Beau following the World Championships. We had the situation with China and the controversy over the burnt stone. And that was one context. I was really interested to talk about the integrity and the honor system in both sports, then also dive into some of the technology components, because we see in golf with distance and equipment and the skills of players, the physical skills, all that, we're seeing the game change, and golf course design is having to address that. And then also, of course, in curling, we've got the recurring controversy around Broomgate discussions. When we had this talk, it was shortly after the curling summit had taken place, but at the time, Beau had not attended it, and there was all the reporting on it wasn't yet available. So we do just touch on that. If you're interested in a deeper dive on the golf discussion related to technology, I highly recommend episode 780 of the golf podcast, No Laying Up. Chris Holloman dives into these topics with Beau, and we'll just touch on them briefly here as well. And I really love this conversation. I really hope to do it again very soon, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it as much as I did. Here is my conversation with Beau Welling. Now, I know that you're in a position, so you are the president of World Curling. So it might be a little tricky for you to be completely frank. The thing that I keep examining, and it relates to both sports, and of course, you're very involved in the golf industry. I have two specific topics that I kind of want to cover with you. So the advent of technology, and then also this idea of an honor system and calling infractions on yourself. Because I think these are things that both impact both of the sports in different ways, but they have an impact. And there's something, I guess, in your role, both as an architect and then also as your position in curling, that you have some oversight with or have some influence in. So I'm really interested in your perspective, because I find these topics, and I even struggle with them because I find them interesting, fascinating, but they aren't easy.
Yep.
And I know you've probably talked about this on a bunch of other podcasts, but if you can give us, for anyone that's listened to this that hasn't heard you on something else, just the quick synopsis of how did you end up in curling?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I'm from Greenville, South Carolina, and, there's not a lot of ice around Greenville, South Carolina, except in in glasses with tea, So, curling became a demonstration sport in the Calgary Winter Olympics in 1988. And I was a sports fanatic, senior in high school. And all of a sudden, here's a sport that I've never heard of that's in the Olympics. And I thought, how can this be? Like, how is this even possible? And I went out of my way to learn about it. And, there were rocks, bricks, and ice. And I thought, this is like the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Like, how can this be in the Olympics? It was just so foreign to me. And on top of it, there was a girl, a 14-year-old girl in the U.S. women's team. And I thought, how can somebody younger than me be in the Olympics? I was 18. How can somebody younger than me be in the Olympics, the sport I've never heard of? This is like, what's going on? So I forget about it. Fast forward 14 years later, come home late one night, turn on the television, and lo and behold, there are rocks, brooms, and ice. And I have no idea what they're doing, why they're screaming, but I recognized that this was curling, and I found myself inexplicably drawn to it, just like wrapped by this. And this is the Salt Lake Winter Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I go into the golf design office the next day and start telling the guys in the office that this weird thing had happened to me watching curling last night. I was almost in this trance-like state, and one of my longtime colleagues piped in that, well, I'm from Northern Ontario originally. I grew up curling, and I'd never heard him utter the word curling. I'd known him for a long time. He never said the word curling to me. All of a sudden, he's explaining to me the nuances of the game. So I go home that night and watch more now that Andy sort of educated me a little bit. come back, bunch, more questions. I kind of do that all throughout the Salt Lake games. And I think the more I watch, the more fascinated I get. And if I were to diagnose why that was, I would say that obviously it's a strategic game. I think about myself as a strategic thinker. It's an ancient Scottish game, and to this day, it's very obvious to me that golf and curling come out of the same sort of Scottish ether. Like angles are important in both sports. They're both based on values and integrity. You call your own foul, um, and they're camaraderie based. And one might argue both excuses to go have a drink of scotch. Um, and and then I do have a degree in physics, so like the science of curling is
Mm.
also sort of interesting to me. So um, that was '02, and then and we were involved in a couple of Canadian golf courses between '02 and '06, and I would kind of joke with the Canadian golf guys that I wanted to start the Southern curling team, and they thought that was funny. '06 rolls around, Torino Winter Olympics, and NBC showed in the United States showed 80 hours of live coverage of curling from Torino, and I basically stopped working for 2 weeks, and I just watched curling like 8 hours a day. I just couldn't get enough of it, and all the U.S. athletes were from the same place. And the word kept appearing on the screen, which was Bemidji, Minnesota. And I never heard of Bemidji, Minnesota. And it struck me as odd that why would 4 men and 4 women from the same town be in the Olympics for the United States? Like most team sports, people come from different places. And so I go online and I learned that Bemidji is where the Mississippi River starts. It's where Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox are mythically from, and it's ground zero for curling in the United States, or at least this town that brands itself as Curling Town, USA.
True. Superior, Wisconsin might also
Yeah,
try to take that, but
sure,
you've probably
sure.
learned about some of that, yeah, later
Yes,
on.
for,
Yeah,
for
and
sure. And so it's hosting the U.S. National Championships 2 weeks later, and so
oh, this is only 2 weeks ahead of it. Like you're just
it's the Torino Olympics. So I'm in South Carolina watching these people from Bemidji over in Torino. They're going to be back home in Minnesota in 2 weeks to compete for the United States National Championship. And so I start kind of joking around the office, like, well, maybe I should go see that. Like, what sport does this even happen in where you get to compete for the national championship in your own small town? And the guys would do weather.com and point out this minus 55-degree wind chill in Bemidji. And like, I'm from the South. I'm not into cold. And in reality, I was supposed to be in Europe on a business trip, golf business trip. And the day before I'm to leave for Europe, the Europeans call and cancel the trip. So all of a sudden, I've got a free week, which never happens to me in my life, and it perfectly aligns with the U.S. Curling National Championships. So this starts to feel like a sign that I'm supposed to go
although
do
you're a
this.
man of science and physicist, so like you
Yeah,
shouldn't.
true,
So it's more random mathematical probability that
maybe,
this strange
but
thing would occur. Yeah,
it felt like one of these strange things that math and science can't answer. So I seriously I feel like I'm supposed to do this, and so
really. So you did you
yeah,
feel like there was a and what did everyone around you say?
they all thought I'd lost my mind,
Yeah.
and I was seriously thinking about going, and I wasn't sure like what the deal was. Like could you get in? Like you could buy reserved ticket or seat online. The period of time to do so had lapsed. So like I'm seriously thinking about going, but like what if it's sold out? Like what
It's
if you can't get in? You
it's
know?
not the Ryder Cup. No, it's
Yeah.
not.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time. Or like what if
Yeah.
outsiders really aren't welcome? Kind of deal. So I had my longtime assistant Grace call. And Grace, so where I live is in South Carolina, right near North Carolina and Georgia. So kind of where the three
Mhm.
states all come together. And so Grace is from North Georgia. She's got a thicker Southern accent than I do. And she calls and gets somebody on the phone. And she's like, hey, my boss, he just loves that curling. And he comes in here every day talking about it. And I don't know what the heck he's talking about, but he loves it. And I see here on the internet, y'all are having a national championship. And I just know he'd love to come up there. Is there any way you can help me get him a ticket? I won't try to do the Minnesota accent, but you
Yeah.
can imagine. And the
Yeah.
guy at some point says, if you don't mind me asking, but like, where exactly are you calling from? And she says, well, I'm calling from North Carolina because that's where the office was. And he says, well, why in the world is somebody from North Carolina interested in curling? And she says, oh, well, he's not from North Carolina. He's from South Carolina. And so the guy chuckled and said, send in $100 or whatever it was. And not only will we get him a seat, we're going to get him the best seat we got. And you got to give him my phone number because anybody that'll come from South Carolina to Bemidji to watch curling, I've got to buy that man a beer. So Grace gets off the phone, explains all that to me. Oh, you ought to go. These seem like nice people. You never take time off. You should go do this. And
Yeah.
so I decided to do it. I venture up, land at on Sunday night, midnight at the Bemidji Beltrami County Regional Airport. Might as well be the North Pole. It's like blinding snow. Go check in at the Holiday Inn Express where she's got me a room. I wake up the next morning, go downstairs to the stale donut deal, and it's empty except for Pete Fenson and Jackie Schuster, John Schuster's mom. But I didn't know
Mm.
Jackie at that point. But Pete Fenson, I knew. He just won the bronze medal. Now I just left Tiger Woods and Bill Clinton. Like those are nothing. This is a celebrity as far as I'm concerned. So I went up to him and I said, Pete, sorry to bother you. But just want to congratulate you on your success in Torino. He thanked me. We chit chatted for a bit. At some point, I said, no, I'm real excited to be here. I just flew in from South Carolina. And with that, he's like, "Oh my God, Beau Welling, oh my God, you're here. Oh, what you made? You have no idea. We were going to have you be a part of the opening ceremonies on Saturday, but we thought you changed your mind. Like, oh man, this is great. Like the town's excited, the club's excited. Like this is just incredible that you're here." So I'm looking around like, am I on a hidden camera television show? Like,
Yeah.
what is going on? Am I getting punked? But apparently, Grace and this whole North Carolina, South Carolina shtick, and everybody been waiting to see was
Mhm.
this nut job actually going to show up or not. So, any event, from there, this sort of crazy true story of me getting involved in curling sort of starts. But it all goes back to this adventure in Bemidji, and it was a wonderful time. I thought I was only going to stay a day, ended up staying 9 days.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
People
Yeah.
taking me ice fishing, giving me the ice, the curling stones, dinners, drinking. I had a birthday while I was there. Town threw me a birthday party. It was just an amazing, amazing introduction. And it's kind of thing like I went there because I was fascinated in the game. And when I left, is that I was so blown away by the people and the
Mhm.
community of people. And that's really what motivates me to this day in my involvement in curling. It's like I just find it's a very, very special group of people, special community of people. People sometimes make fun of me because I say something that I strongly believe, and that is that I think if the world had more curlers, I think the world would be a better place. And I honestly believe that. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to do at World Curling is try to grow this game, and that can mean lots of different things. It can mean playing, it can mean watching, but the values expressed in our sport are something that's super special, and it's the people. It's the people that have sort of is where my passion lies, is in the people and the community around the great sport of curling.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. One of the things that I can't recall who said it, but something that said, if you're a curler, you will always have friends. And,
Yep.
I've moved across this country in various parts of my life and always been able to just connect with people and locally. This is probably a whole other podcast. We talk about, the history of these two Scottish games. I've got a long list of examples we can look at we've seen in golf, because I think that's the thing that a lot of people recognize. If you're an average sort of sports fan, or even if you aren't, we all know the golf ball goes further. We all know that club heads, all that type of thing. You talked at length, and I would refer anyone to go listen to your interview with Chris Solomon on No Laying Up, because I think you cover your perspective on that well. Certainly, and as an architect, right, you plan around that. And it's one of those things now in curling, though, you're in a kind of an interesting role. It's almost like you're at the top of the RNA, and there's a collection of companies. It's not as large, it's not as much investment, but there's still companies that are making brooms. There are companies that are involved in the sport. There's curlers, there's the average curler, there's the high caliber. What's your overall sort of, as you've been in this role now for a while, and as you're looking at this, how technology is impacting the game? And maybe start by, where were you in 2016 when that first broom controversy was coming around?
So in 2016, I would have been on the board of USA Curling and a US rep to World Curling. So it was certainly, not front lines of sweeping summit, all that kind of stuff, but certainly, within the circle of people that was being talked about. I think that what's challenging with curling is how little regulation had been around equipment prior to 2016. Like there really was none. The only real thing in the rule book that said anything that had any merit was like you weren't supposed to damage the ice, but even that's like super not defined as to what that means. So I think 2016, all the stakeholders kind of came together and acted pretty quickly, and out of that came this first sort of set of specifications and rules as it relates to equipment. I think we fast forward to today, and like I think what we're learning is that we have to constantly revisit specifications because things are constantly changing. There's innovation, there's change. It is, what do we want to have happen with technology? Like what's the outcome that's even wanted in terms of how effective sweeping can be, to use the brooms as an example. And it's tricky because, we're dealing with things like foam that change their characteristics through time. And, we aren't golf. Like, we don't have this big, budget or capital to go do incredible amounts of R&D and testing and control.
Like with this golf ball examination they did, this took months and projected out over years, and they had scientists to do and efforts from multiple organizations. What do you have at your disposal?
So we've got some scientists, based around the world that we can leverage, but it's been like on an ad hoc stuff. Whereas
Hmm.
say, USGA, RNA, like have permanent full time technical people on staff. So it's a totally different kind of a dynamic. And so I think we're trying to figure out, how do we safeguard the sport, and not change the sport in an adverse way, but at the same time, onboard all the viewpoints of stakeholders, whether that be manufacturers, athletes, of course, recreational curlers, et cetera. And so it's a complicated sort of stakeholder thing. And I keep saying, like, we've got to come up with smart solutions. And we've got a lot of smart people around curling, but we don't have the capital to go do this like incredible R&D kind of effort to kind of figure all this out. So I really think we have to work together. And obviously, we just had another sweeping version of a sweeping summit here recently. Um,
I thought that was around this. Okay, so that
yeah,
was completed, and were
yeah.
you in attendance, or you had some
I
people
was
there,
I
or what
was
was?
not, and
Yeah.
and in fact, I haven't even seen the report's not
Okay.
even out yet, but it has happened, and so it's something we're going to continue to work on. And I mean, I think there's sort of some immediate term things that we might look at, in advance of Milan Cortina. But then I think the bigger question is like, where does all this go long term? Because it's a bit of a Pandora's box, and I think that's what that we have to be mindful of how do we regulate this stuff. And I've actually spent the USGA has actually been very, very helpful. So I don't know if you know, but the USGA really is the main developer specifications that relates to golf equipment, as well as the main what's the right term, but like tester.
Hmm.
But like, so the USGA is contracted by the PGA Tour, for example, such that they're on site at every PGA Tour event testing equipment.
Recently, at this PGA Championship, where they did a number of testing on different clubs, a subset
Right.
of driver heads, they're the ones
Yep.
doing. It's their staff doing that.
That's right. In essence, a third party between athlete and the host, in this case, the PGA Championship. And so, anyway, the USGA has been very helpful in helping us sort of think through some things as it relates to what actually is going on, both in terms of specification writing, but also this idea of dynamic specifications and sort of the dynamics of what's going on. So, like things changing through time. And so, it's not unusual that a non-conforming driver, say, it's not that it was out of spec at manufacturer, it's that it's become out of spec through use. And so there are other sports that have this big impact. And I think softball's going through a big thing right now as it relates to bats. But I can see that us need to kind of think through that. And there's a lot of on-site testing at golf, and like we haven't had the power to be able to do that, or really the test to be able to do that. But I think that's something we're going to have to look at going forward, of like, how do we have some sort of testing, sort of pre-competition. But we're not there yet. There's lots of talk about all this kind of stuff, but it's certainly an issue. And what I appreciate about the athlete side of this is that I think everybody, they want to support their manufacturers, obviously, but at the same time, I think the athletes all want a fair game. And so I think from a stakeholder standpoint, I remain very hopeful that we're going to be able to come up with some really smart solutions to all this.
Well, actually, that was going to be my next question. Is you talked about stakeholders, and one of the challenges with any of these is, are the athletes, or should the athletes be a stakeholder? Like they have to be, because they are the product. They're what's on the ice, on the field, whatever. At the same time, we all know that their motivations are very different. And one of the challenges, I think golf's similar in this regard. So one of the challenges is, I'm an athlete. I want to make every shot. I don't want to miss. One of the fan challenges in the sport of curling, and this happened, we look at many other examples. If I'm serving a tennis ball, I want to serve it as fast as I can and get as many aces as I want. And one of the issues in curling is, and this was sort of leads into the question is, so athletes want to make every shot. And I'm even challenged here, because an intricate, strategically played game where every shot is so close to perfect is kind of like watching chess on ice, but actually watching real chess is a little boring unless you really know what all the pieces do. Versus variability in missed shots or half shots creates more variability that creates more different changes. And so again, the athletes, they want to make every shot. They want to shoot 95%. So has the discussion been out there? And again, sweeping is one, I think it's a big portion of it. You talked to a lot of the top players and people like Glenn Howard who've been around the game for years. They do believe that sweeping's a large piece of it, but there's other components to it. So what's your thought on that in terms of, are we trying to draw, like, especially as you say, that this is a more of a fledgling sport, golf's well established, drawing the entertainment value in curling when maybe not every fan wants the same thing, but what do you think? Does curling have a physics problem today or in the future? I guess is my question.
So I mean, I think so. To me, it's this big multivariable equation, and that's what is challenging. Of like, you get focused on one thing, like the brooms, but then there are other stuff going on. There's the technique itself. There is the nature of the athletes, and performing better and better, and all that stuff could be aspirational stuff. We want athletes to train and be better and better. And I think you start layering in what you're talking about with the fans, the sort of totality of the experience. And so we're very keenly aware of that and trying to figure out like what's the right way to look at all these variables. And so the equipment and technology is part of it. I think the nature of the game is another part of it. Obviously, we had a big working group for a long time called Maximizing the Value Group, which a lot of people tucked it away as though they were just debating 8 ends versus 10 ends, but in reality, they were looking at
Yeah.
everything you're talking about, curling as an entertainment product. And out of that's what came the no tick rule. Out of that, sort of changes the game. And so I can see us continuing. We are always like kind of looking at like how do we better the game. I think this last year, this technology stuff, this broom stuff, I should say, has been a bit of a wake up call that like our specs just can't be dynamic. It can't be static. I mean, we have to be prepared to be on top of this as best we can. And what is it that we want? Do we want every shot to be made, or do you not? And so I think all of that sort of in the pot of what we're looking at, and it's tough because you'll have difference of opinions on all sides. Like I tend to be switching back to golf. I tend not to personally be a roll the golf ball back person. Like you go to any PGA Tour event, and you'll see a lot of fans watching the leaders, and then after that, who are they watching? They're watching the guys that hit the golf ball the farthest,
Hmm.
and so I'm not sure why we want to do that from a day in day out standpoint. But then you start looking at some of these old golf courses that are becoming obsolete, and then that's where that there's people that think, oh, we need to roll the golf ball back, but then there are other people like, well, we don't want to affect the recreational golfer, by rolling the golf ball back. So it's the same kind of multivariable thing, and so I think we have that in curling for sure.
Well, I think in curling it's a little different in that the amateur player is less of a concern in some regard relative, because as it stands today, you don't really play on the same conditions anyway, right? Like generally, you're not playing on arena ice with these rocks that have striking bands that ricochet so well. I mean, the thing I've sort of challenged people on, people say, "Oh, I don't like the blank ends." Okay, but you like quadruple takeouts at really high speed where things go everywhere, and they kind of correlate to each other. If you want more draw game, more finesse, then the rocks can't do that. And I
Yep.
honestly, I wonder if some of, and I want, golf's in the same fashion. It's like in certain aspects of it, is the genie out of the bottle, you can't put it back in. Like, I don't know if you can get a driver head to be made of wood and this big. That's
Yep.
probably never going to happen. In curling,
Right.
am I going to now get the ice conditions to be worse than they are now and make the rocks less active? I think there'd be a lot of complaints in that, flip side. So I guess fundamentally, do you think the game's in a bad place? I personally, I mean, every sport wants to sort of like kind of be negative about, the fan base wants to kind of, maybe that's just a social construct we have these days, which is we want to complain. Like, I watched those last 3 games at the Briar. Those were three of the best curling games that I've seen in succession in years. And a lot of times we can challenge that it's the men's game that at the very top level, it's the problem, where it's there's not enough variability. I don't know. Do you think the sports, like from a technology standpoint, where we're at, like what's your thoughts?
So I think the sport's in a good place, and I like all the stuff that's happening. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's like evolution, and we have to be prepared to evolve. We can't just be like, don't damage the ice. I mean, because all of a sudden stuff happening that everybody agrees we don't want to happen. So I don't think it's in a bad place, but I do think it's like how do we make the product better is going to be something that at least it's always going to be in my DNA. It's been sprinkled on me by Augusta National of like how do we become better? Like that's the mantra of how they operate there. And so in my mind, that's how everybody should be operating. Like, how do we become better? And so I think, one of our goals is to, try to grow the game. And that could mean more people playing, but it could also be more people watching.
Hmm.
And so I think some of the stuff we have to be careful too of like, it's one thing to say, quadruple takeout correlates with a blanked in for somebody that really, really knows curling. But for somebody that doesn't really, really know curling, like they might enjoy the quadruple takeout, but never understand at all about the blanked in. And I understand you're saying they go together, but I just think it's like we need to increasingly, I think, kind of look at that. I mean, one of the things that really blew me away in the last couple of Olympics, or at least the last, uh, let's say the last Winter Olympics, Beijing Winter Olympics, is the Olympic broadcast system of all the content that they produced from Beijing. Only 1/6 of it was on the field of play. And like the
Hmm.
traditional
Yeah.
starting, watching a game or contest until the end. And so one of the things that's happening in sport that it's really really being disrupted because how younger people are consuming content is very very much changing in a big way. It's like it's all short form like clips and things of this nature. And so I think we have to be aware of that. I mean, it's like so. Think, we at World Curling have our own, in essence, television production company. We're producing all the content and distributing it around the world. But it's increasingly difficult for us to monetize that at all because all you know, the distribution won't pay for stuff anymore because they can't recoup in terms of how that model works. NFL, FIFA, and those kinds of things are different. But if you look at sort of the sort of smaller sports, and when I go to these Olympic things and talk to my other colleagues in sport, it's amazing how it's all the same,
Hmm.
like winter and summer, of like this whole pressure on cost to produce content, demand for more content, but the ability to monetize it keeps going down. And so I know that does seem like fun stuff to talk about, and you say, well, we're not going to change the game because of that, but like we're going to have to think about some things as it relates to all of this, and whether it be new formats or new ways to produce and convey content. Like that's all this is in this big pot.
Well, and I think part of it is, and who was the great producer, Rune Artledge, I think it was. It was like you've got to tell a story,
Yep.
and even golf, I think at times, depending on the broadcast work, like, and that's something I think curling could always use more of. I feel like if you did a Drive to Survive with curlers, there's some great people, great characters, great storylines. It's tricky because it's these avenues. People are careful about being exposed and vulnerable and all of that. But I think there's storylines to be made. A couple things on the technology piece because and I'm interested to know if this has been looked at. So one of the ones I was looking at, so the time clocks per end had been tested.
Yep.
That was one that I remember at first I said to Jerry, I don't like it. As the game gets towards the end, I like maybe a little more time for the drama to draw out. But Jerry made a great point to me, which was these guys are so good and these gals are so good that one way to create variability is to create more of a time crunch. Mixed doubles does a little bit of that. Is that still something that's on the table as a variable piece, or is it trickier? Because I know it was
I mean, I
tried
think
out and then it didn't really seem to fly.
it was another thing that kind of came out of this maximize the value group was this concept of thinking time per in. The television folks, the sort of the bigger you know distribution around television would very much like it to kind of get it more predictable, like when things are going to happen. And there's even sport presentation thoughts. If we can get 4 sheets of curling ending at almost the same time, that allows us to play music or to kind of do whatever. Strong pushback against it from athletes, and so it's not something that's pressing on the table, but I think it's something that I could see us looking into in the future. Switching back, I'm bad about switching. To warn you, I'm bad about switching between golf and curling, and so we were real involved in this
Yeah.
TGL
Hmm.
league, the virtual league, and I think one of the things that some of the data we've gotten back from that the fan base really really liked was having the shot clock. And so guys had 40 seconds in order to hit their shot, and so that created some pressure. To your point about it changes sort of the dynamics and the drama of the whole thing. So there's no doubt that like there's going to increasingly desire to play faster. This is a cross sport, not just curling. And so I could see it be something we're talking about. I keep talking about this maximizing the value thing as a thing of the past. It was a
Okay.
working group that ended, but like we're very much onboarding many of like the subject matter is not done. It was just a formal part of this being a group, and I could, we may even put another group together because there's so much going on so many different levels. I mean, I think one of the things we're excited about is we're trialing right now new sensor in the handles,
I'd
as it
heard that.
relates
Yeah.
to hog on violations. Is the problem we have right in front of us is the old vendors no longer in business, and we continue to have huge issues with this. And so anyway, we trialed that at the juniors in Cortina a couple months ago, and really excited about that. But that's the technology that we're looking at has the ability to go and do other things as well that I think could be very interesting in terms of presentation.
Gathering
For
data,
example,
giving
gathering
representation.
data, but just like the presentation of golf, with the trajectories of the golf shot, like we're not far away from being able to do stuff like that. um,
Shot tracker.
Shot tracker kind of thing.
The other thing, just getting back to sweeping, and this will lead into the next
Yep.
topic. So one thing about the history on the sweeping side, anyone that's listened to this knows the Gauzel history, moving from corn to push brooms from a Canadian perspective, influence that's had, and then transition to different types of broom heads. There was a time that there were very written, just very descriptive rules on you must sweep in this fashion, and it's kind of lost to history. I would have to dig it up, but it evolved over time where it was like, well, this is just too hard to officiate. And as you say, now it's pretty much you have to go straight across. You just can't lift your broom up. That's about it, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys explored, as opposed to the equipment and the materials, also re-examining the technique and what's allowed, and what do different stakeholders say about that?
And big time. I mean, so a part of the studies that's going on is not just the effects of the materials of the brooms. Also technique is a big part of it, and things are being learned pretty rapidly about how big a deal technique is. And so that's what I say. Like, this is a multi-variable thing. It's like it's easy to talk about foam, but in reality, it's like you've got incredibly stronger athletes who are now sweeping in a way that they used to not be able to sweep. And so we're trying to understand what part contributes what amount. And so I think all that's being looked at. That's when I reference like the longer term solution. That's probably a part of the longer term solution as opposed to maybe something we might do in the more near term as it relates to foam. But there's no doubt this technique's a big part of what's going on from the data I've seen, the studies I've seen.
One other thing, maybe you can just confirm this for me. I spoke to Hans's wife, Patty. We did a Legends episode that I'll release in a while, hopefully pretty soon. Patty had sort of explained to me that Hans had to sign a contract that said, I will only have this much curl. The curl will be within some range. Is that, and again, maybe this predates previous years, but not familiar with that. I thought that was kind of interesting, which is like, you should only have 4.5, like 3.5 to 4.5 feet of curl and not 6.5
Yep.
feet, or
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that, so I don't know. Yep.
because it's another interesting aspect of it is it's like a golf course, right? The golf courses we know can have a lot of bearing on scores and entertainment value based on how you feel about it. Could ice conditions is one thing that, are we all trying to aim for the same thing, or should we, or those types of things? Again, the action of the rocks and the conditions of the ice have a huge bearing in the sport. What I find so fascinating is, and you met a lot of these people when you first got exposed to it, they didn't really pay attention to it for a long, long, long time. You think about it. Why didn't somebody try sweeping with one broom in 1977?
Right.
I want to get into that sort of next topic, which is, and the way I grew up in the sport, this honor system, it's very much beholden to its Scottish roots with golf. You put value on calling infractions on yourself. I've heard tons of stories from the old days. Like, there's a great story. Maybe you'll like this one. It was Alfie Phillips Sr. So Jim Waite was playing lead as a young man for Alfie Phillips Sr. Their opponent rocked. It caught some straw and it missed the last shot of the game. To Jim's shock, Alfie goes, "Nope, I won't win that way. You go rethrow that rock." So his opponent goes and rethrows it, and then intentionally throws it through the house to give the game back to Alfie. And to Jim's point, he goes, "This taught me about curling in that moment." Now, I can also, there's a million other stories I can relay to you, even in the 70s, the 60s, back in history, even the burnt rock rule, where the non-offending team is allowed to position rocks. that was created specifically because people were cheating and intentionally burning stones. It's interesting. I talked to a lot of curlers, like modern day players, that don't even understand that little nuance of it, which is what was happening back in that era is, especially at bad ice conditions and somebody would throw it poorly. It's like, oh, this rock's not going to work out. They just snap the corn broom and accidentally kick it and they say, oh, I burnt that. So in the 70s, it was actually Harvey Mazinski was involved with that. He recognized this and they brought in sort of new rules, putting the onus on the non-offending team. So I'll start off by this as we dig in now onto this whole concept of self-infraction and that. One, I love it. I love it in golf. I love it in curling. I think it's unique. I think we don't need to be like football. We don't need to be like all other sports. But I appreciate there's a balance between some level of officiating. Things are on the line. Nations are, invested in medals. There's money involved in the case of golf, considerable money in golf. I had so many examples in golf, but just this past weekend, Tommy Fleetwood, who's, beloved by many. I'm a big fan. He hits a putt, sits on the edge of the hole. Now the rules are such that you need to make your way to the hole and then you have 10 seconds. Well, he took his time. And so now it's under debate whether Tommy Fleetwood was stretching the rules or playing within the rules. Curling has a lot of that same nuance. A team from China can have claims against maybe an intentional infraction, but if there's no intent or it didn't actually happen or they claim it doesn't happen, how do you officiate that? Interestingly enough, on a podcast I'm about to release with Ken Horton, it should be out right before this one, Norway had a similar situation with Scotland, where Norway would not, back in the 80s, we didn't burn it. And so it's Scotland's word against theirs. So as coming from golf, do you embrace, do you have the same feelings I do, I guess, Beau, is what I'm interested to know. I appreciate and really, frankly, adore this aspect of these two sports.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, spirit of curling and people is kind of what attracted me to this all in the first place, and it's why I say if the world had more curlers, the world would be a better place. And so I think the question you have though is if modern society things have changed and we're relying on self-policing, like what happens when self-policing doesn't work? What do you do? And right now, we don't really have a system in curling, the rules of curling to really deal with that. And so I think we're going to have to, I think, look at empowering our umpires in a bigger way.
Golf handles it a little at the top events, right? How does golf, but they seem to maybe have a little more empowerment. Is that your sense or?
Yes and no. So on one hand, golf still, I think, and it's long since I've played competitive golf, so like I'm not necessarily the rules expert on golf, but like my interpretation is that there are officials at a professional golf event who are brought in by players, the requested players, to help decipher what the rules are, so such that the player can adjudicate the rule against himself appropriately.
Okay. Yeah.
What happens though is that if then that player is deemed to not have applied that rule correctly and signs a scorecard that in essence is proved to be incorrect, then there's this empowerment of disqualifying that player.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started to have a whole bunch of issues in golf where you start having these people that would sit around on television and slow motion things down and trying to look and create these, we had some fairly famous situations where, a day afterwards, somebody's getting either penalized or disqualified because somebody called something in from the television. And on one hand, you say, well, that's the rule, they broke the rule. But on the other hand, it's like, well, that player is on the television 18 times more than player Y is. So, like, is this even fair that like one gets this subject that didn't? So I think, but to your point, I mean, there's lots of money at line in golf. And so there's an apparatus around all of this. I think us in curling, we've got to figure out what happens if we have a situation um, where the non-offending team doesn't feel comfortable saying something like, can our umpires step in and make some sort of determination? And like right now, we don't have that.
And video in particular, my understanding too, right, is in curling, video itself, it's not a source of information that can be used when you're adjudicating a official.
Well, I mean,
correct,
it's even more fundamental than that, in that the rules don't call for anybody to be able to adjudicate anything except for the teams on the ice. And so
curling has the same approach to what you're saying, which is the official's sort of role is again to educate the curlers in the same way is that okay? That's the interpretation.
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
And so there's been lots of talk about, oh, maybe we need to have video replay, and like should be able to go to a umpire and allow them to review video. But the reality is, like, we don't truly have the capability of doing that. It certainly is a global body, having rules for lots of events that aren't on television as well. Like that's a whole nother kettle of fish. And so even, going back to how we produce television, we don't have the ability to show instant replay on all four sheets at a world championship. So so you're gonna have rules on one sheet that are different than another sheet. But the more fundamental issue in my mind is empowering an umpire. And so I think that's what we've got to look at first. But I think we don't. I mean, so there are cost implications of that too. I mean, like massive cost implications of numbers of umpires and all that kind of stuff. But there's no doubt that we're starting to see more and more instances where players, athletes are wanting to have the ability for an umpire to come in and say something. And so we are looking at all that.
Yeah, well, it's difficult, right? I mean, so as much as teams might like bend or even break the rules today, and they do in golf as well, and let's not litigate anyone, but Patrick Reed, but I've talked to old timers. This stuff did happen 50 years ago too. Part of it was the stakes were maybe smaller. Part of it was shame mattered, right? Like I think how you were perceived within your community, because again, maybe too the communities were smaller. I don't even want to bring this up, but we all know that VJ Singh, it's going to be on his gravestone, sadly, even though he's by all means seems like a really fascinating character and a wonderful, like what a story, right? From where he came from to be the world's greatest golfer. And yet it's tarnished with this stupid thing. Whereas I'm sure there's like lots of other instances that people aren't tarnished with it. There's no easy answers for this one. I appreciate what you say, which is one is we got to allow officials to have a little more, but that probably involves more training. You need more qualified officials. So it sounds like right now, at least, this is in discussion. Like, is this something that would come through that group that you're talking about, or this is a separate officiating, a sort of a different? Does it have a different audience of a committee?
Yeah, I mean, it's the board's taking a look at it. We have a body, this the Competition Rules Commission, which is populated by board members, board appointed people, as well as our members directly elect people at Competition Rules. And so pretty much all of these issues, whether it be equipment, umpires, all that sort of sits in some of their analysis. But there's definitely this umpiring thing that's been flagged up this past year, and it's one of the reasons we're excited about this technology. We're hopefully it's going to work out for the handles, because the reality is the biggest issues we've had have really been seeming hog run violations, more so than some of these burnt stones things. But I think this technology is going to be the answer to both, actually, because if we get the technology right, it's going to be able to say whether stone was burnt as well. So I think technology is going to be our answer, but there's still this conceptual thing I think we've got to look at about empowering umpires in some way, shape, or form without becoming football, right? So I know that seems like an oxymoron, but that's the line I think we're trying to walk.
Back to the putting the onus on the non-offending team, which is very different than golf, I think, as well. I mean, if you're playing opponent, you can have an opinion. Famously, there's the Venturi Arnold Palmer from the Masters, but where Venturi didn't agree with the ruling on 12 and all that wonderful stuff. But for the most part in curling, it's like I'm playing against you directly, and
Yep.
so all of a sudden the rule states that I get to choose now how to proceed in the world of public opinion, and it's this is where I find it fascinating. You talk to the old timers, if they just tap that draw coming into the forefoot, they're like off. But in the modern era, a lot of players, oh, well, that had minimal impact. Don't worry about it. But once there's that line of decision making, then that lends itself. For one, I'm kind of one I feel for the players, but as somebody who also covers the sport and wants it to be interesting and entertaining, I think that aspect of it, again, creates a wrinkle that is fascinating. Like it's a little messy, though. Getting back to my original thought for you, Beau, is where do you sit on this aspect of the game? Because I feel like coming out of golf, it's something you understand and probably appreciate. This idea, right? This fundamental idea. Like, what's your
I mean, so going back a second, we keep talking about the non-offending team. We have the issue though of like if the offending team doesn't say they offended, so like that's so we don't even get to the
then we're in
non-offending team.
fisticuffs at some point if we're
And
not careful.
so
Yeah.
I think so to me, it's trying to find. So again, I don't want to keep saying smart solutions, but like I think we need to do something where I think one, if we can have some technology, I think we can solve the hog on stuff. I think we can solve the
You take away the ambiguity and you take away the players. So, as an example, so the traditional rule around hog lines was a big burly guy would walk down, and then he, like Tom Wilson was famous for this in Saskatchewan. He would go and he would just kick people's rocks off.
yeah,
He's like, and on the one hand, fans might go, "Whoa, that's entertaining." On the other hand, I don't know if you want the sport to reflect that, and then all of a sudden, again, it turns into a lot of conflict. So
yeah,
I kind of like your point where you can. I mean, tennis has done this. On the other hand, now we don't have a John McEnroe yelling at an umpire anymore, so we miss
yeah,
those fun clips. But for the broader sport, barring any sort of technical challenges, once you got the tech working, you can solve for that. So
yeah.
okay, well I guess I'm happy for you. I'm starting to feel a little mixed on the whole outcome that we may get to, but I kind of see it. I see it.
Well, I don't know where we're going to get to. I mean, I think I'm just one small person talking around all this stuff, but I think the question I think we've asked ourselves throughout the world curling community has been like, hey, do we want to have, you know, I'll keep picking on hog lines. We want to have a person clearly going across the hog line, delivering the final stone to win the gold medal. Like we have to be able to address this in some way, shape, or form. So I think that's we're gonna try to come up with a good solution.
Did Warren Hansen write you a letter in that? I'm just wondering because I sat with
No,
Warren at the Briar. He just gets he's watching the hog lines and he just starts getting angry and frustrated. And I'm like, I get it, Warren, I get it. I'm a little mixed on it. In the slams, they try to do the police themselves sort of avenue by it. But if we get tech, at least then it's something that happens on every single shot, and we can remove it. Why not? To
yep,
me, that just seems like a no brainer.
yep,
We don't have officials that have to get involved. We don't have controversy. We don't have players. It's just it is or it isn't. So
right.
I'm kind of with you there. Anything else being done then from a conversation around the just the way the rules are written? I wonder this: are the rules examined every few years, or just like what, or is it usually when?
Yeah, no,
What usually happens?
no, this constantly. So this competition rules commission, like that's constantly what they're doing. Is they're evaluating rules, suggesting trialing new rules. So it's an ongoing process. I don't really see that changing.
I imagine as someone who grew up in the game of golf, though, you really, I guess my question is, did you, in the same way that I do, like admire that aspect of the games? It sounds like you do.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely.
And again, it always gets harder when sports become professionalized at any level. But the idea of I call my own foul, the integrity of the game is important. Yeah.
So, so to be clear, let me be clear. To me, like that's what makes the sport, one of the things that makes the sport super special, and we need to not lose that. But I think we have to have some systems and mechanisms to deal with if that system that we love breaks down and isn't working. Like then what happens? And I'm not sure. I don't know the exact thing, but that's what I'm calling the smart solution. Is like to me, we don't need to go to like the umpires in charge of everything. It's like football. I think it's still we've got to empower our athletes to adjudicate the game, but I think we need to have some way of what do we do if something breaks down? And I don't have the answer to that, but I think that's what I think we need to try to come up with.
My only other wrinkle, I think the video piece I thought was kind of interesting because it's funny how it is used in golf, but then as you say, they sort of pull back from it a bit because they didn't want people calling from home all the time, but they will. I'm a little bit mixed on that idea. I know that 1994 Canadian Juniors, by all accounts, there's some probability that Kevin Cooey and Jamie Cooey should have won it. I actually talked with the head official about that. It was very complicated because she said, I cannot look at that video. That video is not a piece of evidence that can be associated. I need to talk to the teams, understand what happened, and based on the word of the rules, again, unless the other non-offending team had said, "Well, yeah, you know what, good game, we lost," but yeah, just and so those, those stories carry on. But I do think the athletes more and more want less of that, and they want to have it decided out on the ice and have as much
Yep.
answered for them. So I appreciate
So
that.
obviously the replay is not in the rules, but like it's again, it's more fundamental that the umpire is not in, can't make the decision. But the technical part of this is that we are increasingly switching coverage from what we call MF1, which is the full television truck, full production, to what we call MF2, which is more sort of a computer sort of based. production with more static kind of cameras, automated cameras. And the reality is, and we're doing that from a cost standpoint. So going back to that, content costs keep going up, monetization keeps going down. To keep having curling being broadcasted around the world, we're having to change how we produce it. But the MF2 doesn't allow replay at all. And so we're increasingly not even having the technical capability to show replay. And so that current is very much against this whole thing. And that's why I think technology, in some way, shape, or form, of tracking stones in some way, shape, or form. Again, we're not there yet, but I think that's going to be our answer to try to get to what people are saying when they're talking about replay.
Great. Well, any other thoughts? Anything else that I triggered there that you can think of, Beau, or is
No,
that?
all good.
I
I mean,
think
it's obviously complex situations with complex dynamics. I mean, one that I on the golf side in particular, I talk about all the time that like people go to their mind, we got to deal with the golf ball, but yet we don't talk about these things that are this big, made out of metal. They're called woods, right?
I'm like you. I'm old enough to remember when they went there. I was like, wow, this looks really easy to hit. Yeah.
And I won't get the data, and I think people really underscore how much the athletes in golf and curling have really changed. And so, like one of the stats I used to throw out, I won't remember it exactly, but like the number of made field goals over 50 yards in the NFL was like less than 10 in the 60s and the 70s. And you go to modern day, and it's now they make 15 or 20 a weekend. And the ball hadn't
Mhm.
changed that much. They probably are kicking a little bit more indoors than they used to. But the reality is that people have figured out how to kick the football, and become better athletes. And so I think it's a whole part of this, all this stuff on all this sport is like, man, these athletes are not the same as they used to be, and they've just gotten to be very, very powerful and very, very good.
And I do think that's where steering curling a little bit, and it's tricky because again, it doesn't have all the financial backing that golf would have in terms of the size of the sport, but physics are paramount to how the game is played, and the tricky part becomes when every single shot is made 97 to 100% of the time. Like it's not as interesting and it's not as
So totally agree.
entertaining. And yeah, and so it's like how do you manage that, and how do you manage that with athletes, and all the athlete is trying to improve the sport. I mean, and analytics is part of it too, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
you solve something like baseball went through that, and I think it's been challenged by, well, if everything's just crunched into numbers, and again, I'm a guy who likes the numbers, but I also am romantic about the poetry of a sport, and the storyline, and that. So you got to blend them, and if you get too much one way, yeah, it's not the same.
Totally agree. I mean, baseball's another good example. I mean, they obviously went through a whole huge rules changes to try to address the nature of the game, and it as a sports property, and they've been very helpful to help us kind of think through some things too. So like this is not, a lot of this stuff is not unique to curling. It's really kind of across the sport ecosystem.
I try to be an optimist, Beau, and I think you've got some interesting things on your plate. I feel like my only feedback, I guess, would be love the athletes. They're all wonderful people, but always remember they have what their goals are, and they may not, they want to make shots. Sometimes it's okay if they miss. I know they hate to think that, but that's kind of the tricky
No,
part,
I mean,
right?
obviously, very, very important stakeholder, but there are other stakeholders as well. So, I mean, I think all this stuff is trying to balance, and luckily we got a lot of great people on the board, a lot of great people and staff, and a lot of great people that care so much about this game. So we're all ears with many, many things right now.
That's great. Well, really enjoyed this, Beau. I'm glad we did it.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Have a great day. See you.